This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, truth seekers and true crime junkies. Nanette Bartow here with another episode of Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Laundry and research this week. Our YouTube commenters, an old poacher's trick by Ammo08 has said Jack was arrested for poaching. Somewhere in the writings about Zodiac, someone mentions a pistol or rifle with a flashlight taped to it, an old poacher's trick, which kind of nailed it on the head because he did bring out the point that Jack had been arrested for poaching, which was in fact true. Again, it was under the wrong last name. So if you were to search it, you wouldn't find Jack Terrence. I believe you'd find either Jack Torrance or Jack Terrence with an E in both places of the last name. Either way, I did comment on that and I said yes, and he was arrested under a false name, so it does not appear in his record, but I have a copy of the charges. This is one of the times the Zodiac goes silent, and we believe it is because Jack could not have a gun for 1 year. The Zodiac Killer letter was a 3-page letter where he is correcting an erroneous statement by the police about how he was able to see his victims in the darkness. Another commenter had brought up interesting stuff, and this is in regards to Dennis's documentary. There should be blood on the hood if it was used at the lake. I responded to that. Yes, there should be. FBI stated there was no available DNA on the hood. So either we weren't told everything since the hood was kept as evidence even after testing. It was if it was washed, which might explain the fraying on the hood, or it's not from that crime. So there is a couple options or theories there as to why they would tell us they hadn't found any DNA. And that may be because they were keeping things close to the hip, as they should have been in this case the entire time. We did talk about the juke fabric that did predate the crime, and that's all we really know, other than they did not discredit or return it based on the stitching being goldish or orange versus what the public was told, which was white. So it begs the question as to its genuineness. Again, I believe that they probably know exactly what the style of the hood was, how it was sewn, assembled, and put together based on Hartnell's descriptions. And this would have been another way for them to easily state that this hood was not the hood used in the Lake Berryessa. But I tend to believe, on a side note, the hood that Dennis turned over to the FBI was never discredited as being the wrong size, shape, material, or color of thread, which, by the way, might have been white at one time and turned to that color that we saw in the end when it was found some 40, 50 years older or later. Let's see, since it had sat in a storage shed for quite some time in Dennis's possession and in and out of the heat, there is a good chance that that color white could have turned, as we know that white paper does or white clothing does over time. So the fact that they didn't discredit that hood or give it back is a huge indicator to me that there's some value to it in this case. Well, today we are going to have a special guest. I want to welcome Laura Jones to the show.
Good morning.
Hi there.
Anna.
Good
Hi.
morning. How's everything on your side of the world?
It's great. So far, we don't have snow or ice, so I'm happy.
Do you usually at this time of year?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ohio. Yeah.
We get
It
shocked.
changes daily, though. If you don't like the weather today, wait till tomorrow and it'll change,
Oh, that's nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just started to hear the raindrops come down just before getting ready to start the podcast this morning. And we've had beautiful sunshine for almost a week now. So I was I have to say, my downturned smile showed up.
There you go. Well, the trees are smiling, though, right?
Evidently, evidently they're going to be happy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, Laura comes to us today based on some happenstances in her life, which were fairly scary. I think that they're fairly traumatic for just about anybody who would have to go through it. It kind of runs in tandem with Sandy Beth's story, which we heard over the last couple of weeks, which is a stalking case. And this one is a little more scarier because I feel that this individual was interested in Laura versus the intimidation that the stalkers of Sandy were trying to perpetrate. And that's not to say that this guy wasn't creepy and that he wasn't intimidating and he didn't scare the bejeebies out of her, but I think that he was literally interested in her, and we're going to talk about that story today. So where in your life did all of this begin?
I was just a young mom. I was like 26 thereabouts, and I was my husband was locked up for actually they found out later it was something that he was not guilty of. However, I was just trying to survive, and I took a job at Sambo's restaurant in Chino, California as a waitress. And waitresses get to know people just by pouring their coffee and emptying ashtrays. Of course, back then there was ashtrays on every table, but
that's something that's definitely something that Sandy expressed, because she herself was working as a waitress and in many local establishments that served drinks and coffee. And she talked about much of the same thing. So you're kind of a target in that atmosphere for many guys to hit on, to stalk, or to admire. And you kind of get the gist of who's into you and who's not by whether or not they sit in your seating, right?
Right. And this fellow, he'd come in and sit with the local police that used to congregate down at the big corner table there, and he would sit with them and chat. And so, he was kind of, people were used to seeing him in there. But then when he noticed me, he started coming to my section and sitting in my section every time, and so that's how this all started. And it went on for probably about 6 months, this whole terrorizing thing, but it was enough to, make a huge dent in my life. He started
Well, let's let everybody know where you were at that time. So you mentioned Sambo's, but you were actually in Chino, California. This was circa 77, 78, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
And so I mapped that out, which we can see over here. It's definitely the Riverside area. And this is what drew your attention to the possibility of the Zodiac Killer and Sherry Jo Bates, because it is approximately, depending on the route you take, 28 to 40 minutes from Chino to Riverside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you indicated that Bill Riley was the individual's name that you were having the issue with, correct?
Yeah. Yes. And he was also friends with my boss, Mort, and would, Mort allowed him to go into the office and sit in there by himself even sometimes. And so, everybody kind of didn't question him. I mean, he just because he was in there so much, and everybody, oh, he's all right. He's okay.
I want to kind of give everybody an idea in their head of what you were dealing with. So let's run down the description of this individual. Go ahead and describe him for us.
Okay. I would, I'm guessing probably around 5'10". I'd say right around maybe 180, 190 pounds, stocky built, very fit. I mean, he wasn't fat. He didn't have a pot belly or any of that, and he dressed, I mean, he was so meticulously dressed, his hair, everything was, perfect. I mean, he never let anything, he didn't look at all sloppy.
That's usually the military persona, right? I mean, most military, you have to have everything high and tight, pressed and starched and perfect. Now you indicated,
the way he walked, the way he sat down, the way he even, would drink his coffee, even everything was kind of methodical, I guess is the word.
That's a good one.
And
now you said he had medium brown hair.
Yeah. It wasn't black and it wasn't blonde. It was, like a medium brown color.
And it lots of pox scarring on his cheek, as if he had acne probably when he was younger.
I mean, it just, I just figured, maybe he had a real bad case of acne at one time, and, it was like scarring on his face.
Right. Now, also, you indicated that he had his signature knee length brown leather trench coat, which I found interesting because doesn't that usually scream undercover private investigator, CIA spy type stuff?
I mean, well, back then, I was just a very gullible, I did not know the stuff I know now at all, So I mean, to me, it was out of place for Southern
Right.
California because most people just didn't, I mean, it was warm usually there year round, and I mean, people did not wear long coats and stuff much there, and he always, he had these like ankle boots on, leather, always everything was shiny, I mean, he was always, and he wore a belt, and I can't remember about his pants so much. I didn't really notice that so much because I was always looking. Every time he'd come in and sit down, he'd open up his coat enough to let me know that he was packing a weapon.
Wow.
And
so he's brandishing. I actually met somebody not too long ago that made the comment to me that, so what if my gun is sticking out beneath my jacket as I'm riding my motorcycle down the road? And that's not brandishing, he says. Well, he's aware that it's there. He's aware that it's showing. So that means that you are intimidating and you are brandishing. The fact that it happens to be that it sticks out, your job as a concealed carry person is to cover that gun. People are not supposed to know that you have it on you. So I find it very interesting that that is almost a subtle intimidation tactic. And based on my friend, I believe that that's exactly what he was doing as well. So anybody who is showing you their gun when they're allowed to conceal carry wants you to know the premise that they have that gun and that you should either be scared or you should not be worried because they can protect you, right? You also mentioned he had icy blue eyes, which
yes.
I'm not sure if anybody, and I'd have to go back to look to see if anybody has ever stated the eye color of the Zodiac, but I'm not sure that I've seen anything like that since either A, they never even really saw his face, or B, he wore the hood. But you also indicated he walked with a military cadence. But for me, that does not account for the lumbar that's mentioned in the walk of the Zodiac. So when the Zodiac was seen leaving the Paul Stein scene, it was commented on that he had a lumbar. Brian Hartnell also stated that he had a lumbar. The girls at Lake Berryessa who witnessed this secondary suspect, which I'm starting to believe really has almost no tie unless he was just a pickup guy or a ride out for the killer, had really nothing to do with this crime because he lacked the lumbar as well, and he wasn't described in the same mannerisms as Hartnell described as Tacker, which was this sloppy, messy lug with a pot belly, overweight, large individual, versus the three teenagers who saw this well-fit, well-built, very nice-looking man. They all commented on him being very nice, and that black hair could have been just it being greased back and giving it the look that it was darker than it really was. So yes, that suspect actually kind of fits in with some of the descriptions that you are giving in regards to this this man we're going to talk about. At any rate, there is a stark difference between sloppy dressing and neat dressing. And what you're saying fits in with somebody who might be CIA. I know that Jack was military, but he didn't necessarily always carry himself in the most groomed fashion as some military people continue to do even after they leave the military. But back to, you mentioned there was another coincidence between this, and that was that Bill owned a newer model yellow Volkswagen.
Back then it was newer than mine. Mine had the smaller rear tail lights and everything. His had the bigger lights in the back. And that's how I knew it was a newer model. Mine, I had a 68. So I don't know, what model his was, but it was newer than mine.
So at some point after he started sitting in your section, he propositioned you, correct?
Well, no, he really didn't proposition.
For dinner.
Well, this was after. Yeah. This was he was talking with the police, sitting there, and he said, and I had my boys with me at that time. I was at working. I just came in to pick up a check or something. He said, "Oh, he says, why don't you come down to my Italian restaurant and, bring the kids and have spaghetti or something?" He said, and he said, "Do you guys like spaghetti?" And of course, they're like, "Yeah," And so I thought, well, I guess that's okay, and the cop said, "Oh yeah, he has good food down there and everything." So I said, we might do that. And so at that point in time, he says, well, he said, "Meet me." I said, "Well, where is it?" And he said, "Oh, it's just over under the freeway there, across the freeway." And the Pomona freeway ran right there, just yards from the Sambo's there. And he said, "Oh, you'll never find it." He said, "Just meet me here and I forget what time it was, in the afternoon, like 2 or 3 o'clock or something, and follow me down there." So I did that, and I forget, it was like the next day or whatever. And so we went down there, and I parked, and he parked, and he got out, and then he went and unlocked the front door of the restaurant. It was just a small restaurant in a cluster of, it was like one big, huge building that they had divided into separate businesses.
Like
And
a little
so
strip mall or something, right?
Yeah, something like that. Only it was real the old buildings. And
Gotcha.
so I thought, well, that's weird that he has to unlock the restaurant. I mean, it was in the afternoon. You'd think it would be open and all that, And I thought,
Right.
well, that's
A
weird.
restaurant is usually running 7 days a week. And even if you're a lunch or dinner type restaurant, you're usually got employees and wait staff in preparing for that lunch or dinner rush. And you come to an empty restaurant. I think I would have freaked out the
Exactly.
second I saw that.
Well, red flags went up, and he says,
Right.
we don't usually, start serving until later on. And he said, anyway, he says, "I wanted you guys to have the restaurant, to have it all to yourselves." And I thought, okay, this is weird, So, but anyway, we went in, and he, sat us at a table, and he said, "Okay, I'll be back." And he did. He came back with some food and all that, and we ate. And he didn't hang out with us or anything while we were eating or anything. But then after we were finished, he said, "Oh, you guys want some spumoni?" Which I guess is Italian ice cream. And of course the boys, yeah, they wanted some spumoni. So he said, he asked my oldest son, he said, "Well, come on," he says, "and help me." He says, "Let's go back and get the ice cream." And so they went back into this area, back behind this, it was in another door, kind of an open door, and there was a walk-in back in there. And then here in just a minute or something, I heard Cameron screaming and carrying on, and beating and like pounding noises. And so I jump up and run. And he was standing there with his hand on the door, like, so Cameron couldn't get out, and laughing. And I was furious then. I grabbed the door, and I shoved him and grabbed the door and ripped Cameron out of there. And we just jumped up and left at that point in time. Well, that's when everything changed. His demeanor changed. That's when he started doing really creepy things. He'd come in there and sit at my table, and he always wrote these like codes on napkins, and I
Well,
always
let me
wondered.
back up just for a second, because I want to talk about that demeanor. Now, I get it when uncles, brothers, and friends play practical jokes on each other, and they, would lock you in a room or a closet or whatever, and ha ha ha, you can't get out. But this individual did not have any type of former relationship with your children, correct?
No, yeah, he didn't know them at all.
And to laugh about something where somebody is considerably scared in regards to being locked into something like that is almost kind of maniacal. And we will talk a little bit later about some information that's come out in regards to the Zodiac purportedly laughing in a frenzy while he's stabbing the couple at Lake Berryessa, which again is kind of a sixth sense of humor or mentality. And I do find that is, I mean, if you're trying to put your best foot forward and you're trying to make a good impression, you don't scare the living crap out of the woman's kids. I mean, that's just not a go-to.
Right. And the thing is that he didn't, he just, like he said, "Oh, I didn't hurt him," and all this. But after that, I mean, he didn't talk at all, hardly, after that. In fact, he hardly ever talked, and he talked very low key, and I mean, he hardly ever talked.
Now, you
So
mentioned the writing of codes on napkins. That was something that you could watch him do, but you were never able to see those napkins after the fact. Do you remember the type
mm,
of things or codes that he was writing down? Did they just look like symbols
it,
or
yeah, like weird little symbols, like, I mean, if you didn't, if you weren't like pouring his coffee and actually looking at it, you just think he was writing, pretty much, but he'd sit
Oh,
there and
gotcha.
write, and he did wear glasses when he did that. He wore glasses when he was writing,
Right.
like regular, like just black rimmed glasses. But
And
then,
that's me. When I need to write something or need to see small print, I definitely throw on my glasses for the reading purpose, but normally on a daily basis, it's not something I need to wear. So, and
right.
you said he was a smoker.
Yeah, because I'd empty his ashtray all the time, I mean, I mean, that was my job. I mean, I've served the public my whole life. I've, did that. Then I worked in preschool, teaching preschool kids and driving the bus. And then I worked in nursing homes and, hospitals. And now I'm working and have been for the last about 7 years with the developmental disabled. And
And
so,
I applaud you for that. That's a tough job, that's for sure.
it is, but it's very rewarding for me as well as for them because, I mean, I learn a lot from them. They go through challenges every day that we can't even imagine,
Imagine,
and
right.
so they're like my heroes.
Now
I'm
he
having a bad
actually
day.
at
I
one
can get in.
he actually at one point actually slid a paper in front of you with some personal information on it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, he, kind of summons me over and I thought it was to bring coffee, so I had my coffee pot,
Well, let me
and I
set up a
went over there.
foundation. Laura, was this before or after the restaurant incident?
After this is
Okay.
this all this kind of weird stuff is after the because I really, I mean, I wasn't even friendly to him at all. I mean, I didn't even say hello. I just say, may I help you if I had to wait on him, but I
Right.
mean, I didn't want to have any conversation with him whatsoever, and he never offered for that. He was
And this
not.
is where it starts to get creepy. So he pushes this
Yeah,
paper in front of you, and what did you see on it?
everything about my 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 date of birth, where I was born, where I lived when I was a kid, where my mom and dad lived, my mom and dad's name, my husband's name and his date of birth, and he knew he was locked up and where he was locked up, and he knew the date of his so when he was supposed to get released, and he knew my son's school, where he went to school, when he got out of school. I mean, all this stuff is all just listed on this paper, but he never would
So
let me
he's been
have.
doing his research and he obviously has access to information or to be able to research and get information that otherwise, I mean, the internet wasn't available. You couldn't Google somebody to figure these kind of things out. So clearly he has inside information that he should not have his hands on.
Right.
How did
And
that make
I thought about it and I thought, well, maybe, when he's in the office, because Mort would leave him in there in the files, he could get into the files and get any of the employees' information. He didn't keep anything locked in there.
But even
And
on your application, things aren't like your spouse's name and social security number,
no,
where he's in prison, when his release date is, where your children go to school. There are so many things that are not in your employee file.
right. And then he did, at that point in time, he did say, yeah, he said, your son gets out of school at whatever time it was, 2:30 or something, like that, just real quiet, like, yeah, I know,
That's
and then
freaky.
I was totally freaked then, that's when I started, everything was in the panic mode at that point, because I thought,
Right?
oh, boy.
This guy's checking on me. Now, you also
Yeah.
indicated that he actually laid a letter from your husband in front of you.
Yeah, this was just, it was probably maybe a week or so after that. He comes in there, and sits down, and after he, flashes his, firearm at me and everything, and sits down, and then he pulled a envelope out of his coat pocket and laid it on the table, and then he motioned he wanted me to come over there. So here I go with my coffee pot, I'm like, oh boy, what now, so I go over there and I'm pouring his coffee. And then he points down at this envelope, and it's my letter that my husband had written to me that I had left on my bedside table. So he was letting me know that he had been in my house when I was gone, and he had gotten that,
Did he
And
take
I
that letter
started,
with him, or did he return
yes,
it to you?
no, I tried to get it like that, and he just snatched it up and smiled and put it back in his coat.
Oh,
So,
Jesus.
yeah, at this point in time, I'm thinking, he wouldn't let me have anything that, any of the papers, because like the napkins that he did those weird code things on and everything, and I mean, he would do codes on the whole napkin, like line after line after line after line. And it was all these strange things. And, I had no idea. I thought, that is so strange.
Well, maybe the book that he put in front of you kind of made you relate why those codes were occurring or why he was writing those codes. Tell us about that book.
Yeah, and then it was like maybe another week or something after that. Of course, he'd been in there, multiple times in the meantime. But here he comes and sits at the counter this time, which, I usually worked in the coffee shop area. There was a coffee shop, and then there was a great big dining room too area. But I used to work the coffee shop mostly. He sat at the counter, and he just had this book opened up, and then he motioned for me to come over. Oh boy, and
what now?
Yeah, with my coffee pot, and he just, pointed down at that book, and I glanced down, and it was a picture of a person being strangulated with piano wire, and it said, murder, however it explained it, piano wire. It was just like a caption down at the bottom. And I just looked at him, and then he just slammed the book shut, and it said CIA murder tactics on the front of the book. And so I'm like, oh, good grief, so I just went on about my day and everything. And I think later that day I asked Mort about it. I said, that guy is really weird. I said, there's something wrong here. I said, he's been doing some weird stuff. And I told him the stuff he's been doing. He said, oh, he's Bill. He's all right. He's a business owner here, and the cops know him, and he's all right, and everything. And I thought, oh my God,
yeah, you people. I know that Sandy Betts had indicated she had received 2 Garretts in the mail. I want to say sometime in the 2000s, but they were kind of like a piano wire. As I recall, they were based off of 2 looped rings with the material that ran between them in order to create a garrote and strangle somebody. So maybe there's a possibility that not only was it maybe the mob that was stalking her, but maybe also ex-CIA at that point as well. Who knows? But you both have that in common with this strangulation thing that's going on. I know that you had stated that he had actually attempted to strangle somebody.
Well, there was a lady, and I don't know if maybe I shouldn't say her name, on the air, just because I don't know if she's even still alive or anything. I mean, I've lost track of her back then because she actually quit after this episode that she told me about. But at any rate, she was a waitress there too. She was older than I was. She's probably, like maybe 40, something like that, maybe in her 40s or something. But she was a nice lady, and she said, she told me, she says, don't you ever have anything to do with him. She said, he is a complete psychotic maniac. And I looked at her, and she said, I did. She said, I went out on a date with him. And I said, you did? And she said, yeah. And she said, when they came out of the restaurant, she said she wondered why he parked way in the back where there's hardly any other cars, And she said he kind of put his arm in from behind her, and she thought he was going to hug her, And so she just kind of stood there. She said she didn't know what to do. And then he brought some kind of a strap. She thought maybe it was like a boot, a boot, one of those kind of heavier boot strings or something. And about that time, she said that a kid that worked in the restaurant, a busboy, came out with a bag of trash to put in the dumpster, which was also out back. And so she said at that time, she just kind of elbowed him in the gut and just broke and run. And, she said she ran as fast as she could. She was in such a panic. And she said if it hadn't been for that busboy, he would have killed her. He'd have choked her to death right there. And so she
Well,
said she tried to tell the cops about it, there at the restaurant and everything, and they just laughed at her. They just thought she was telling a story, So
now,
she
you
said,
also witnessed what appeared to be that this man had possibly been tortured at some point. You had described a situation that I would love for you to share.
Yes, after that, she called me, it was, like, I don't know, around noon or 1 o'clock, something like that. And she said, Laura, come here, and she motioned for me to come to that back big window in the back of the restaurant where the dining room is. And so I went back there and looked out the window, and here this guy was, with that Volkswagen, and he had the back of it pulled, opened up, and he was working on it, but he'd taken his shirt off, which, when I thought back, I thought, well, yeah, he was such a neat Nick, he didn't want to get his shirt greasy, But anyway, his whole back was just covered with these huge, deep scars, like like somebody would have had to whip him with a, rubber strap or something to make that deep of huge scars. And it was just crisscrossed all over his back. And she said, oh my gosh, she said, she said, boy, I've never seen that on anybody. I said, me either. I said,
Right.
there's, we, at that point, we just, and it wasn't too long after that she quit and moved and everything. Nobody ever heard from her anymore. Yeah.
And that's when the harassing phone calls began, correct?
Yeah, he started making calls to my phone at home. And of course, back then, we didn't have the cell phone thing going on. I mean, I guess some people had them, but I don't know. Nobody I knew. Cops had them, right. I guess. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, he'd make phone calls, and he wouldn't say much. He would just breathe, heavy breathing and make some weird noises. But then the one time he said, are you ready to go to the forest in Canada? And he didn't have a deep voice. His voice wasn't like, wait. I mean, he, right. He had a very, quiet voice. And anyway, I just hang up, and I kept doing.
Well, we do know that there is a Canada connection with the CIA, with the mob, with all of these government programs such as MK Ultra and so forth. So Canada does not shock me as a go-to place. Canada or Mexico, when I hear these two places, I tend to kind of perk up and listen to what that person has to say about the individual they're dealing with. Now, at some point, you also found that your Volkswagen had been disabled.
Yeah, I was gonna just run to the store real quick and get, whatever. And I there was like a carport. Everybody had a carport, space. And there were like, shelves up there if like kind of a mini storage area and everything. But anyway, my car was right next to the neighbor's car. And when I went out to get my car, I turned the key, and I mean, nothing. It didn't do anything. It didn't click. It didn't do anything. It was just nothing. And I thought, whoa, that's strange, And so, excuse me. And I got out. And when I got out, I got this creepy feeling like somebody was right there watching me. I was like, how you just get that all of a sudden? It was like chills went down my spine. But then shortly, the neighbor man, he came in the side door there and kind of startled me. And I looked and I said, oh, I said, it's you. And he said, yeah. He said, are you all right? I must have looked scared or something. And I said, well, I said, I tried to start my car and nothing will happen. I said, it's just not, it won't even click or anything. And he said, let me check it out, And he had a flashlight in his car, and he went and got it and was looking around, and he said, oh, it's just some wires off, He said, I said, well, how would that happen? He said, oh, who knows? He didn't think too much of it, but he fixed it, whatever it was. And and then it started right up, and I didn't have trouble after that. So, but I had a feeling that.
So a disabling of the vehicle is something similar to what Sherry Jo Bates was a part of. Of course, the killer waited until she was in a location where she would require. I mean, obviously, you're safe at home. If the car is disabled, you're still at home. You can go back inside and be safe. And in Sherry Jo Bates' case, she was at a local college, at the library, and obviously would need to either get a ride home or get a ride for help or to get somebody there to fix that particular problem. So it's great that you had a neighbor there and you were still in the safety of your home, albeit that's extremely scary. And the fact that this individual that you're dealing with is in possession and owns a Volkswagen as well, he'd know exactly what to pull in order to make that Volkswagen not work. Yeah, that's just scary.
Still don't know what it was, but it was something that was easily fixed, so
right.
That was a good thing.
Now, you had mentioned a stamp collection that he spoke about as well, which I thought was interesting because stamps do play into the Zodiac persona. So tell us about that.
Well, he was, showing the police there sitting with them, and he had pulled out this stamp, and it was actually in a little case thing, like a special stamp, so nobody would touch it, I guess. And he was explaining to them that, he said he had the one of two that were, the only two left in the world. And he said, if I can find the other one, he said, I'll be a very wealthy man. And he was, just kind of bragging to him that he had this special stamp, and he mentioned to him that he was going to he was going to go check out some stamps up at some coin stamp place in Pomona, a shop in Pomona. So I don't know. I remember him saying that though,
And then at some point in time, I'm sorry, say that again.
At this point, I was trying to, get any information about him I could. You know what I mean? Trying to remember stuff,
And so at some point in time, you noticed he also bought a panel van. How did you figure that out?
Well, I didn't know he had that until actually we were at the laundromat, and my son was just sitting there looking out the window, and he said, Mom, he said, there's that weird guy again. He's sitting out there in a van. And I, went and looked, and yeah, it was him. All right. And after that, everywhere we'd go, and he would just sit out there way out in the parking lot, you could tell it was him, but everywhere we'd go, that van would be behind us somewhere,
So he's following you now, which is consistent with the stalking. Now, he could very well have owned that van due to his business. Obviously, there are pickups, deliveries, things that are needed for the restaurant business that a panel van could come in handy with. But obviously, if he's busy following you around wherever you're at, showing up and sitting in parking lots while you're doing your laundry for hours at a time, he clearly wasn't back running some restaurant. So either he had other people running it for him and he just was the owner who popped in from time to time, or that was really kind of just a cover for who he really was, because you also mentioned he liked to take off quite frequently and go up north, correct?
Yeah, there would be, 2 or 3 days, when he wouldn't come in the restaurant. And I was always relieved. I thought, oh, thank God, maybe he's, left or something, moved or something. And so I would inquire about it, with the cops. And so I'd say, oh, where's that Bill guy, and they'd say, oh, he went up north for a couple days on business, and it's
not like a waitress to say, I'm glad my customers aren't here, right? Because
well, he was a laughing tipper,
Okay. Yep. Frugal. Well, at this point, after you realized you started getting stalked, you actually took some proactive movements. You got scared, literally, and you ended up, I think you said, left work and removed your son from school, correct?
Yep. After he followed us so much, and there was times I thought maybe he had, was coming around the house late at night, and I never did actually see him, but there would be like taps on the window or something, and by the time I'd get over there, I could not see anything. It was like he was just trying to terrorize me, with the phone calls and all these,
And so you told the cops, right?
Oh yeah. I told the Chino police, and I called the sheriff out, and he actually came out. And when I told him who it was and everything, he said, oh no, he just kind of laughed. He says, I'm not getting into that. He says, I don't even want that paperwork. And he just got in his car and left. And I was like, oh, I went to
what
my
is that supposed to mean? You don't want the paperwork?
I know. I said, he's like the county sheriff. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, I was just awestruck. I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do now? And, I really didn't want to tell my dad and stuff because I mean, I knew he had guns and stuff, but I thought he'll come up here guns blazing and he'd probably get killed,
Oh
I
man.
mean, I really was afraid. And I told my ex-husband because I knew he had a gun and I thought maybe he'll loan it to me, because I was just, I knew that this guy was going
Petrified.
to get us, And
Now, at
he
some point,
just,
you actually sent your sons to their biological father, correct?
yes, I mean, when it got to the point where I knew I was not going to get any help, I took them up to his house and I asked him if he could have, keep him for, a week or two, until I could get something done about this. And he did. And so they stayed up there for, it was about 2 weeks, I think. Well,
And
in
what
the
was your
meantime,
next step? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, no, you're fine. Well, my next step, I mean, I was blocked in my apartment and I had it had sliding windows and a sliding door. Everything was sliding. And I thought, oh my God, so I blocked all the windows with whatever sticks and broomsticks or whatever I could find, to try to, and I was just, I guess I was just in a terrorized state, where I didn't know what to do. And so finally I thought, I've tried everything else. So I thought I'm going to try to call the FBI because that was, only other thing I knew that, might work. I didn't know.
Right.
I just wanted somebody to know that this guy was doing this stuff, And so I called him and I told him the whole story and everything that he'd done. And I said, you probably think I'm crazy. And he says, well, he said, ma'am, he says, give me an hour. And he says, I'll call you back. And I thought, yeah, right. I wasn't going to hold my breath for that,
Right.
Excuse me. And so I waited, and I thought, oh, he's not going to call, but he did. He called me back. The phone rang. I was like, oh, thank God. I answered the phone and he said, well, I have good news and bad news. And he said, well, the good news, he says, you're not crazy. And the bad news, though, is he said this guy is an ex-CIA agent gone bad. He said he's been up for murder 2 times, never been convicted. And he said he will kill you if you give him the chance.
Oh,
and
gosh.
he said, my advice to you would be to just, pack up and get out of the state, not out of town, out of the state, he said.
Right. Right.
And he said, don't leave any trails behind you. And I said, well, how come nothing's being done about this guy? And he said, well, it's a long story. But I had given him his name that I knew him by, which was Bill Riley. I had given him the kind of car he drove in the description of the van, the best I could, and his the license plate number on his Volkswagen. Told him he owned the Italian business, supposedly. I mean, as far as I knew, he had that Italian restaurant. I told him everything I could about him. So, and they knew who he was. I mean, there was no question.
If they could, if they could find that he was ex-CIA and wanted to warn you of that, and basically telling you get out of town, you then what? Told your then husband, correct?
Well, I had kind of kept from telling my husband because he'd actually, broken
You'd go crazy
out
sitting inside the jail. Yeah, you'd go crazy knowing this.
And I thought, oh my God, and so, but at this point in time, I had to tell him, because it had gotten so horrible. And I thought, oh, what if this guy does kill me? My husband will never know what happened to me,
Right.
So I did. I told him the next time I talked to him, and the next day he called me and he said, well, get ready to pick me up. And I said, what? And he said, yeah. He said, get ready to pick me up. He said, I went before a judge. He said, they listened to my, case and they, verified everything that you told me. And he said, and they're turning me loose, So I was like, oh, thank God, I mean, because I knew that he would, help protect us, because he
and honestly, any criminal could come before a judge and make up some sort of story like this, but it has to be true that the judge verified the story that he had given in order to have decided to have released him, absent of the fact that he had not completed his stint in jail. So
and
that is extremely compelling. That's very much compelling evidence in your case, in which what you're telling us about what you found out about him being an ex-CIA member is holding true.
Right.
Now, let's see. You also had kind of a thought. We've got about 5 minutes left here, but you also had a thought
Okay.
as to why they would have released your husband to deal with this man.
Yeah, I didn't think of it until after he got, I went and picked him up and we got home and everything. And we were going down Central Avenue, actually, and this guy was behind us.
Oh man.
And yeah, and I told him, I said, honey, I said, that guy is back there, about 2 cars behind us. And he looked and I said, he's in that yellow Volkswagen. And so he slowed way down. My husband slowed way, way down to where the guy had to pass us, It was like a 4-lane highway. And so, he got a good look at him. And the guy tried not to look at us. He just kind of was like going on by.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, he went to his restaurant and parked behind his restaurant. Well, my husband, he had his pistol on him, which of course back then that would have been a felony all by itself because he was a felon,
Right.
and he should. But he, at this point in time, he got one because he knew the situation, and so he actually had a beat on the guy. And I thought, man, they've set him up. They're going to let him kill this guy, and then they're going to lock him up and send him to the gas chamber or something, for murder, and then they'll be rid of both of them. That was
because your husband actually had, obviously, we discussed this a little bit, but the reason why he had his stint in jail is because he had taken things into his own hands over somebody he cared for, correct?
Well, I don't know. It was some friend. Are you talking about why he was in prison before?
Right.
Yeah. He'd done a 12-year stretch in a prison for, actually, he was a boxer. And him and this guy got in a fight, some friend of his or whatever, and got in a fight, and he hit him so hard and knocked his eyes out of his head. He had to have his eyes, wired into his head.
Okay, so then I might have misunderstood that a little bit, but I think that they knew that if that theory is true, then they knew that he would take matters into his own hands and hopefully rid them of this individual who obviously was not a very good person to begin with.
They knew that. They knew my husband would actually, would take action on him. If he and just the stuff that he'd done was enough for my husband to kill him.
Yeah. Now in 2015, your son,
I begged him not to do it, and he didn't, but I mean, he actually had him, in his sight.
And
but if it hadn't been for them turning him, I wouldn't have known what to do because I was by myself. I was just a dumb young woman,
No, you needed your husband. In 2015, we've only got 2 minutes left. In 2015, your son actually comes to you with Grace Smith's book and the Lake Berryessa composite, and shows that to you. And that's when you started to maybe think that there was a possibility that Bill Riley could have been this I'm not even going to call this guy a suspect anymore because I'm not really sure that he belongs on the scale of a suspect. He was some creep staring at some chicks at the lake like that's unheard of or whatever. I don't know. The fact that he was fully dressed and nicely dressed obviously indicated he wasn't ready for a day at the beach. So that does make him kind of creepy if he's standing in the background staring at people. But this composite that was developed out of this individual is something that kind of rang a bell with you. And you thought that there was a possibility there could be a connection between Bill Riley and that suspect composite from Lake Berryessa. And we are down to one. What's that?
Sorry.
We are down to 1 minute.
Okay. My son actually came in one day, and this is, all these years later, and just has this open book, another open book with this composite on it. And I just about fell through the floor because it looked just like this guy minus the pox marks. Right. And I looked and I said, "Where did you get that?" And he showed me, and it was that Zodiac by Grace Smith, the book.
Right.
And I said,
that's going to be about. I'm sorry, that we're right at the end right now. Okay. I just wanted to kind of sign off and leave everybody with everything. You did say that you believe the FBI and CIA both know who the Zodiac is, that it's one of their own, and they don't want really the public or anybody else to know that they have a rogue agent that is out there doing these type of deeds. And obviously, if law enforcement
tried to get him. I'm sorry. I've tried to contact them since I saw the composite too, and they won't respond.
Right. Well, and law enforcement not taking it seriously, being friends with these individuals. This is something that I've shown that Jack also has this same aptitude for. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I want to thank you so much for telling your story today, Laura. I look forward to, if there's any other information that you can think of or you want to bring up, I can update. And if anybody has questions, I will check back in with you. For now, everybody have a wonderful weekend. It was great to see you. And next week, we're going to be back into the Zodiac case and more new information and articles on the hood. Take care and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.